It has been quite a while since I made my first video on 3 Mount and Blade-like games you've probably never heard of, and that video went down incredibly well. However, this series, which of course is incredibly inspired by Iron Pineapple, I say inspired, more like copied, I'm going to be going over today 2 more games that are exactly like Mount and Blade that I doubt many of you will know. However, these 2 are way worse, but they're quite fun to laugh at. Unfortunately, this is probably going to be the last video about the Mount and Blade-like clones, because unlike Dark Souls, there's hardly any of them. However, without further ado, this is 2 Mount and Blade-like games you've probably never heard of. The first game I'm going to be looking at is Vale of Crows. Now, Vale of Crows is a game that came out all the way back in 2017, and back then the game was fairly basic. So I went back into this thinking that, you know, it's probably had some updates, it's probably been expanded upon, and it's probably in a decent stage at this point. But what is Vale of Crows? Well, as you can see from the gameplay, this is an understatement to say this was inspired by Mount and Blade. It's almost a Total War meets Mount and Blade type, where it's taking the overworld map that we see in a game like Warband or Bannelord, with different cities, fiefs and castles that you can go between, trading, recruiting, even finding bandits and villagers along the way. You can grow up using diplomacy to find lords, allies and even enemies, and the Vale of Crows uses it pretty well. However, I feel like this overworld map is sometimes too similar to something like Mount and Blade. It is so reminiscent of it, it could be mistaken from screenshots, even just moving around with your party. It has similar UI and different features. However, speaking of the UI, it's not great. The game itself feels very cluttered. There's a lot of information in it, but it's quite hard to find it, using icons that are very similar to each other, and of course using so many drop-down menus and hovering mechanics that when you get put into the game, unless you've done the tutorial, it's quite hard to know what you're doing. And you might just say, don't be an idiot, do the tutorial. But even then, the tutorial doesn't help all that much. But complicated UI out the way, how does the game actually play? Of course, you can start in different ways, having more a sandbox mode, deciding how many fiefs or castles you own from the beginning, or maybe even just starting from scratch. But you need to be able to build production and of course military recruitment inside your towns and cities in order to grow your army. Once you've done that, it's up to you to go and expand your empire, whether it's raiding villages, finding bandits to take, or even sieging castles. Even early game, you notice some of the issues when you get into these battles. Of course, like I mentioned, this feels like a Total War meets Mount and Blade, and you'll see that once we get into the battles. Moving in, you can see the deployment screen of all your troops, and starting the battle, you have this overhead look, being able to select different troops with the cards at the bottom or just clicking on them, moving them to different parts of the map in order to fulfill your great wishes of being the strategic master like Hannibal Barker himself. However, the units are kind of unresponsive and it doesn't look great. Granted, this is an indie game and graphics aren't everything, but it still feels like an early version. It feels clunky and it doesn't have a premium feel to it overall. The animations are okay, and I quite like the impact of arrows on bodies and of course generally zooming in on the battles. I feel like this is something fairly easy to get into these top-down strategy-like games because it feels like a miniatures fighting on the battlefield in front of you and getting down in there, seeing the bloody screams of swords, spears, shields, horses, bows, arrows, crossbows. It's very satisfying, and this game does bring that. But overall, the battles are kind of short. They don't last all that long, and units go down very fast. One thing I have noticed is that quality of unit is one of the most important parts of this. You can get as many peasants as you want. However, overwhelming the enemy isn't much of a tactic in Vale of Crows. I tried to get a small unit of well-trained soldiers with some decent armor. They weren't the best in the game, but they were alright, and they managed to slice down most of my peasant horde. Yes, I still won the battle in the end, but it wasn't a pretty sight. But my biggest problem for this is the lack of strategy. In an RTS game, there's not much you can do. Of course, you can do the generic flanking, putting horses around the side, doing hammer and anvil charges, but unlike a game like Total War, they don't seem to have much impact. It's hard to turn the tide of a battle just using strategy. It's more down to the troops that you have, and yes, it kind of makes sense, but for an RTS game, I'd like more emphasis on that sort of thing. Unfortunately, as far as I know, there haven't been many recent updates, and I don't even know if the developers are still working on it. I'd love them to bring out some more stuff because it has some great potential, but at the moment, Vale of Crows is an okay game at best. Gloria Sink, a game that I have showed on this channel multiple times, mostly because it's quite good at making people angry. You see, Gloria Sink is a very interesting game, especially in the Mount and Blade-like genre, if it's even a genre at this point. You see, a few years ago, Tailworlds gave the option for developers to buy their game engine. You know, the engine for Mount and Blade Warband. We saw this done quite successfully in a game like Blood and Gold Caribbean, adding things like ship battles, some cool new mechanics with trading, growing money, doing quests, becoming a pirate, and showing this whole new Caribbean war face. However, Gloria Sink has done it a little bit differently. I don't exactly know what it is, but it just feels like a Mount and Blade mod. You'll see on the gameplay on screen, you'll be thinking, this is just Mount and Blade, and you'd be right. It is just Mount and Blade, and that's all it is. It's a Chinese skin on the original base game Warband. In terms of additions, there are a few and some better diplomacy, and I think it really focuses more on the RPG, role-playing throughout the game, doing different quests and meeting new people and growing your relations that way. And of course, Warband is technically classed as an RPG, but I feel like Gloria Sink is more focused around that way. I really love the towns and cities, the way they've modeled them look beautiful, and everything in the game is fine, but it's fine because it's Mount and Blade Warband. And that's the problem with this. The game, when I bought it, was about £15 if I remember correctly, but don't hold me to that, and now is about £5. It's incredibly cheap, but you're paying £5 for what is essentially a mod for Mount and Blade Warband. There are plenty of mods like this that you can play, and yeah, I would say there's a bit more polish and it plays quite well. There are a few more cool things with sieges and having larger and more impressive battlegrounds to fight on, but they're not anything that other mods haven't done. There are mods like Gecko Kuju, Clash of Kings, even a multiplayer mod like Full Invasion 2 that has some of the best architecture, modeling, and map design of any mod that was in Mount and Blade Warband. They're all free, and I would say they're better mods than this. Gloria Sink is just a paid mod on Steam, really. That's essentially what it boils down to. And yeah, I said at the beginning that both these games were bad games. This game isn't that bad, but it's not anything new. I fail to see why they're charging money for something that you could just download for free on ModDB. But please, leave your comments down below. I'd love to know what your opinions are. Do you think these Mount and Blade games are warranted? I would say in my first video when I did Blood and Gold Caribbean, Viking Way, Preem and Guerrilla Warfare, they were all games that I think warranted their standalone prowess. That it didn't feel just like a mod for the original Mount and Blade, and it felt like you were actually playing and paying for a completely different game. But I feel like Vale of Crows is good, but it feels a bit dead at the moment. There's not much to it and it feels very unpolished. And Gloria Sink is just a glorified mod. I think there's much more of a downgrade in terms of quality with these two games compared to the first video. But please let me know what you think. If you haven't already, go and check back on my first video where I go a bit more in depth about the 3 games that I mentioned previously. But leave a comment if you know any more of these Mount and Blade clone games. They're really fun to make videos on, and while some of them aren't great, I think it's really cool to showcase, and as long as you guys understand that you should probably only do your own research before you buy a game, I think a lot of people enjoy watching those types of videos as well. So leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.